If you've seen my videos before, you kind of might have figured out that I like movies and I like pop culture. I like all kinds of movies. Horror movies, comedy, sci-fi, drama, love it all. One subgenre of movies that I really like is a grifter movie or a con artist movie. Maybe because I watched The Music Man so much as a kid.
Hey, what are you selling now? Last I heard about you, you were in steam automobiles.
I was.
Well, what happened?
Somebody actually invented one.
No.
So now I'm back at the old stand.
Not boys' bands.
Or because The Sting is the coolest movie ever made. Hey, everybody, it's the holiday season again, and maybe you could treat yourself this time. Get yourself a gift of a new website. That's right, the sponsor of this video is once again Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform designed to help you stand out and succeed online. Whether you're starting out or scaling your business, Squarespace gives you everything you need to claim your domain, showcase your offerings with a professional website, growing your brand, and getting paid all in one place. I've been loving the contact section of the website since I launched it with Squarespace. A lot more people are reaching out to me that way with a personal message, and I really like it, and I think it's a great way to interact with the viewers, and I'm so happy that Squarespace gave me that opportunity, because sometimes things can get lost in the comments, but when somebody really wants me to know something, they can just go in there, hit that contact, it sends me a message, and you get to talk to your old pal Trev. If you have a dream, that dream needs a domain. Squarespace domains make it easy to find the best name for your business, all in one, fair, all-inclusive price, no hidden fees, no add-ons. Every Squarespace domain comes with advanced privacy and security tools included to ensure your domain remains online and protected. Plus, Squarespace provides everything you need to bring more of your dream to life. Whether that's building a website, adding professional email service. Don't wait. Claim your name. Invest in your dream today. Also, here's one I haven't mentioned before. Squarespace makes it easy to showcase your expertise and engage clients with video content on your website. Upload and organize your videos, create stunning video libraries, and even monetize your content by adding a paywall. Perfect for online courses, exclusive tutorials, and premium workshops. So go on down to squarespace.com/belief for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use offer code BELIEF to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Come on, folks. Let's make some websites. But I was watching some apologetics the other day, because I'm me, and I realized that there's a lot of parallels between what apologists do and what grifters in con artist movies do. So what exactly does an apologist and a grifter have in common? Or at least a grifter in a movie? Let's start by dissecting a scene from a movie to explain some of the common tropes of the con artist or grifter movie. So I'll go with this scene from the movie Matchstick Men.
This taken?
No.
You sure? Got a lot.
In this scene, the girl who just tripped is the grifter. Everything from the trip to the sweet girl act is her way of setting herself up as someone innocent who can be trusted.
This is nothing. You ought to catch me during Little League season. 3 boys.
And then we have the nice lady. She is the mark, the one being grifted, the target of the whole scheme.
Any of them cute?
Uh-huh. Simon's about your age, so you'd never guess. He's so hyper.
I'm gonna get a soda. Do you want anything?
No thanks, honey.
Oh, honey? You dropped something.
And then we have the setup. The grifter has already shown us that she is a trustworthy kid. She's offered to buy the lady a soda, so she's built that rapport, and then they randomly find a lottery ticket on the floor.
No more rhymes now, I mean it! Anybody want a peanut?
And this is the setup. She's priming the mark, getting her interest piqued, while playing it off like it's not a big deal.
Not mine.
You sure?
You gotta be 18 to play.
Looks like somebody put it through the wash by accident. It's yesterday's drawing. That looks like the second, don't you think?
Probably a loser.
And then we have the misdirection. Now, you could argue that the real misdirection was earlier when they made the fake lottery ticket, but I think this is also a type of misdirection here. She plays off that she doesn't care about the lottery ticket and she just walks away. This makes the mark think that it's her idea to check the numbers.
We should at least see if it hit. We won $600.
Dad, we should call your mom and we can all go down together.
You know, it's okay. I'm supposed to be home anyway.
No. We're in this 50-50.
And then we get the payoff. But what does this have to do with apologetics? To me, it seems like they work on a very similar model. Now, I'm not saying they're breaking any laws, or I'm not saying that they're legitimate grifters in that way, but it seems to me that they follow a lot of the same steps.
Well, that begs the question, Abigail. You want to be a thief, or do you want to be an artist? You see, an artist takes whatever he wants when somebody's looking right at him. It's too small for me.
Yeah.
You get the point.
Yeah.
How do you go from being a committed atheist to having a role in a movie called God's Not Dead, Part 2? How does that happen, Jay?
Well, part of it was just that my wife was more interested in going back to church. She was raised kind of the cultural in the church, but really had no idea what Christianity taught. We didn't have a Bible in the house. And for the 18 years we had been together at that point, she knew better than to bring this up around me because I was just not interested. And I would have gone as an atheist. My dad's been doing that his entire life, and I would have been happy to do it too.
He is setting up his backstory. His story goes like this. He was a staunch atheist and a police detective, but then he used his skills as a detective to prove that Christianity is true. This sets him up as someone who can be trusted. He isn't just some other Christian trying to come up with arguments to convince people. These are based on his own studies as someone who didn't believe when he did the research. He's setting himself up as someone whose arguments must hold some weight because he was coming from a place of skepticism himself, and he was an atheist himself, and then he found undeniable proof.
Something now began. A seed of grand epiphany. A hook. A tale.
A plan.
A fiction, both for profit and to ease his brother's heart. A simple con in 15 steps.
I think because when I first started, I was just interested in Jesus' words. So if it had been just a list like the Gospel of Thomas, a list of the quotes of Jesus, the kind of proverbial wisdom of Jesus, that would be one kind of document. But of course, the Gospels aren't that at all. The Gospels appear to be recording a series of events that include Jesus' words, but they appear to be a historical account. And that's a very different proposal altogether. That means that if it is history, if it's a claim about something that actually happened, it means it's falsifiable. In other words, it's like my cold cases. I have people who will say, hey, I saw this is what happened, and they give me a narrative. Well, I can actually go in and take a look and see if that's reliable. Is that true? Did it actually happen? Is it falsifiable? And that gives me a point of context, a point of reference to begin an investigation.
Although, if you hear his stories, when he talks about cases he's worked, it doesn't really seem like he was the best detective around.
And it turns out, let me just say this, when you walk into a death scene, your presuppositions will determine how you interpret evidence.
Yes, totally.
Period. If I walk into that scene and I'm convinced that a husband did this, I had a scene like that once, where they were convinced the husband did it. Well, there was no husband to be found. We spent a week looking for a husband or a boyfriend. She didn't have a husband or a boyfriend.
They spent a week looking for a person they made up? So what, they never heard of a single person before, so they just assumed she had a husband or boyfriend?
And this is my partner, Detective Terrible Detective.
But the atheist turned Christian after they launched their own investigation is one of the oldest tricks in the book.
I was actually an atheist from my teenage years. I concluded that the idea of an all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing God of the universe, creator of all, was just absurd and not worth my time to check out.
This is Lee Strobel. You may have been awkwardly given one of his books by a relative. It seems to me that he's painting atheists in a slightly dishonest way. Now, of course, he could have been like this as an atheist. He could have considered himself an atheist who also didn't want to check things out. But I would argue that most people who would describe themselves as an atheist would also describe themselves as a skeptic. And a skeptic is anything but someone who doesn't look into things. And again, his story may be true, but he's also seemingly using it to paint atheists simply as people who haven't taken the time to really look into Christianity.
But for most of my life, I was an atheist. I thought the idea of an all-loving, all-powerful creator of the universe, I thought it was stupid. I mean, my background's in journalism and law. I tended to be a skeptical person. I was a legal editor of the Chicago Tribune. So I needed evidence before I believe anything.
And there it is. He's establishing himself as a skeptic. So he's somebody who needed evidence, but also didn't bother checking it out. If he wants actual skeptics to hear him and listen to his arguments, why would he paint skeptics as something that they're not?
But again, I think your background will bring credibility to this whole discussion.
There it is. It gives him credibility. But if being an atheist who looked into it gives you credibility, what about all the atheists who looked into it but are still atheists?
And you never drop the con. You never break. Die with the lie.
But it's not just the atheist turned Christian. There's also the intellectual, the highly educated. You should listen to this person because they have a lot of schooling.
Well, to help us sort through all this is my friend, the great Richard G. Howe, who was my professor at Southern Evangelical Seminary and is still a professor there, ses.edu/Frank. You may get a scholarship.
The problem with schools like Southern Evangelical Seminary, as someone who went to a Christian college with very similar ideals, it's that these schools teach you what to believe and what to think, and they don't teach you how to think for yourself and how to reach your own conclusions. And that's never been more evident than with Frank Turek. Frank Turek is a wonderful public speaker. He is very good at getting people's attention and being very personable with people. He's also very good at memorizing a lot of arguments.
Thanks for coming. Congratulations, that was really interesting.
Thanks.
Can't believe you remembered all those lines.
Yeah, it's nuts.
But I've never seen him make an argument himself that he didn't get from somebody else. I've only ever seen him follow scripts. And he still has a similar origin story, but he was Catholic turned evangelical.
I grew up in New Jersey, so I went to Catholic high school, and I was Catholic because it's the law. All right? If you're from New Jersey, either Catholic or Jewish, or you don't care. So I always knew there was a God because I knew there had to be a first cause. I knew there had to be something that caused all this.
It wasn't until I went through college, went into the Navy in Navigator School in Pensacola, Florida. I met the son of a Methodist minister, and I had so many questions for him. I just kept asking him so many questions. He finally said, look, you just need to get Josh McDowell books.
Evidence Demands a Verdict and More Than a Carpenter. Those were books written in like the 70s. So I got those books, I read them, and I said, wow, this really appears to be true. And I began to go to a church where I didn't get a 7-minute homily, but I had a 45-minute sermon so I could learn more.
Even when I was a Christian, I was really embarrassed by Josh McDowell books because they were just awful arguments. And I remember thinking that if I didn't already believe this stuff, these books would do nothing to convince me. But then there's other intellectual apologists who have a lot of different degrees from both religious and non-religious schools, like William Lane Craig.
Reasonable Faith features the work of philosopher and theologian Dr. William Lane Craig. He is widely regarded as one of the greatest defenders of the Christian faith of our time. For over 30 years, he has been researching, writing, and debating the world's top atheists, agnostics, and skeptics in defense of Christianity.
The one Christian apologist who seems to put the fear of God into many of my fellow atheists.
Our goal as Christians is not to win arguments, it's to win people.
William Lane Craig is probably really good at school, really good at academics. He's a wonderful debater. He's good at arguing with people. But the problem is he's still arguing something that there's no factual basis for. I recently found this Medium article that talked about something William Lane Craig said that in many ways invalidates his intellectual sounding arguments and makes you realize that, oh, he's just like all the rest of them. He just sounds smarter. Here's what he said.
Nothing has come up in terms of God speaking to me directly where I know it wasn't just my own imagination. Many of my fellow Christians have had similar concerns on this also. This is perhaps my biggest struggle, and I cannot seem to get it out of my head, as it is causing me to abandon the Christian life because I cannot have high epistemic confidence that Christianity is true. Kyle in the United States.
When I first heard the message of the gospel as a non-Christian high school student, that my sins could be forgiven by God, that God loved me, he loved Bill Craig, and that I could come to know him and experience eternal life with God, I thought to myself, and I'm not kidding, I thought, if there is just one chance in a million that this is true, it's worth believing. And so my attitude toward this is just the opposite of Kyle's. Far from raising the bar or the epistemic standard that Christianity must meet to be believed, I lower it. I think that this is a message which is so wonderful, so fantastic, that if there's any evidence that it's true, then it's worth believing in.
Someone who has built a career on talking about the evidence for the existence of God, who has written so many books, debated so many people, given so many lectures about the evidence for the existence of God, when asked by a young man who was struggling with his faith about whether God is real or not and why God doesn't show himself to him, his response is to just believe just in case. He basically went with Pascal's wager. The reason this answer causes people to question everything he's ever said is that it seems to show that his arguments have always been based on assuming that it's true and then finding arguments to support this thing that he already predetermined was true. Okay, so in the clip breakdown that I did of Matchstick Men, I talked about the grifter and then I talked about the mark. But I'm going to hold off on the mark for now and just go into the setup.
There's a class called Basic Grifting. Should we all learn how to be grifters together?
Wait, what do grifters do again?
I got this. I'll tell you for $5.
No.
You better sign me up.
I'm obliged to you, but I gotta get going.
You ain't going nowhere from this way.
Let me see. I gotta run some slots down in West Bend for a mob here. I got a little behind in the payoffs, so they figure I've been holding out on them. They gave me till 4 to come up with the cash. They don't get it. I'm dead.
It doesn't mean we're saying we're sorry. It comes from the Greek word apologia in 1 Peter 3:15. Always ready to give an answer or a defense. In Greece, it means that you're defending your position. Doesn't mean that you're apologizing, that you're wrong or anything. It simply means you're defending your position. So that's where it comes from. So 1 Peter 3:15 is sort of the apologist rallying cry here. Always be ready to give an answer for the hope that you have. But it really also goes back to the greatest commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Christians don't get brownie points for being stupid.
I would argue that the setup for the apologist is them explaining why apologetics is so important and why we need apologetics more than ever.
But I think what happens is that I can construct walls in front of the gospel to prevent myself from hearing the gospel clearly. And if you were someone like me who spoke this evidence language that I speak, you'd have to learn how to speak my language. Look, I think that word does have power. But you would agree if you were going to Swahili and you don't speak Swahili.
How does one go to Swahili?
You'd have to at least translate the words of the Bible. You wouldn't go and say, hey, the gospel's got power spoken in English, even though nobody understands English. There are a lot of folks in our culture right now who don't see the Bible as English. They have constructed a barrier between themselves and the Bible. A lot of it is just language, the way they might approach certain things. The way, for me, it was, you got to show me a way in through the evidence. You had to. That was my language. That was kind of how I processed everything.
Yeah, because Christianity is a truth claim. It says that these things historically happened, that miracles happen today, and that God wants a personal relationship with you. These are claims about reality. Of course, if you want people to accept a thing that you say is fact, you'll have to show them that it is fact. Or at least some people will need to see some evidence. But apologetics is sold as a solution to a problem.
Now, Mars, I need some ideas if I'm going to get your town out of the serious trouble it's in.
River City ain't in any trouble.
We're going to have to create some. Must create a desperate need in your town for a boys' band.
Really quickly, I'll never forget the time when after being a youth pastor here in Kearney for 2 years, a young man who was in my Bible study for those 2 years tapped me on the shoulder at the beginning of his junior year of high school saying, "Hey, Tim, I'm not coming back this year." I'm like, "Why? You've been in my Bible study for 2 years." He goes, "Well, I became an atheist over the summer. I've been watching Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and Stephen Hawking and fill in the blank with your favorite atheist." And I said, "But you know that's not true." And he said, "No, I don't know that, Trim." I said, but look, right here in this Bible that we've been reading, Paul tells Timothy that every word is God-breathed." And he goes, "Yeah, but I don't believe that." I said, "Why? It's in the Word of God." "Yeah, but why should I think it's the Word of God?" "Because it says it's the Word of God." And he said, "Tim, that's circular reasoning. That's a logical fallacy, and therefore you've given me no reason to think it's true." I didn't even know what a logical fallacy was at that point as his youth pastor. And I failed him because I didn't know how to answer questions. And it wasn't just him. Many people were either losing their faith or at least getting a shaken faith. And when you have a shaken faith, even if you remain a Christian, you're not an effective Christian. And so apologetics is vital in the church today because it strengthens the faith of Christians. I tell people, when you come listen to Frank Turek give a talk, you're going to get a shot of faith steroids, right? And it's going to strengthen your faith. And so I think it's vital to have apologetics in the local church today.
So when it comes to a truth claim like Christianity is the one true religion, or Jesus died for you and rose again, or that Jesus wants a relationship with you, and you are confronted for the first time with the fact that some people you know don't believe it anymore, or don't buy this as fact, you could just find arguments to convince other people to go back to believing this thing that they used to believe or you want them to believe. You could argue with them, you could learn apologetics, or you can start to search for yourself to figure out if it is true. But when your job depends on it being true, of course it makes sense to go with the former.
Not just have this superficial kind of emotional feel that God exists, because a lot of kids, I'll tell you, go off to college with nothing but feel-good emotionalism. And when they run into a college professor who is bent on atheism, and he gives what seems like good arguments against Christianity, they're left defenseless, Hank. Somebody put it this way: the easiest way to get picked off in a war is to not know you're in one. And many Christians run off to college not knowing they're in a war, or just go out into society not knowing they're in a war, and then something happens and they're left defenseless.
We're talking about UNC Charlotte at Chapel Hill. UNC Chapel Hill. Professor Bart Ehrman.
Yes.
He's become world famous. He's developed a cottage industry, writing books about how the Bible is filled with not only errors but intentional lies, as he puts it. But he's particularly proud of doing the very thing that you're alluding to, and that is causing the faith of many of his students to waver.
Even though they are so happy to raise up a former atheist turned Christian because they found the evidence just so overwhelming as an argument for their faith, and act like they were just following the evidence where it led, and it led to Christ, as soon as someone like Bart Ehrman comes along, who was a Christian, but then followed the evidence where it led, and it showed that the Bible has too many errors and historical inconsistencies, and it got to the point where he eventually left his faith and shared his findings. When it's someone like that, they paint him as someone whose goal is to lead people away from Christ or lead people away from Christianity. To me, that accusation is a confession. They are saying that their goal isn't truth, their goal is to lead people to Christianity. Now let's talk about misdirection.
There's $5,000 there, and here's $100 for you.
Okay, old man, I'll make your drop for you. And don't worry, you can trust me.
Hey, if those goons decide to search you ain't gonna get far carrying it there.
What'll we do?
You got a bag or something? How about a handkerchief?
Here's a handkerchief.
Here, give it to me. Give me the money.
Just hurry, will you?
You got any more? Better give it all to me if you want to keep it.
They think I've been holding out on them. My wife got sick and I had to pay the bills. I wasn't holding out on them.
Stuff it down
I've
your
always been
pants
good
here.
for the money before,
Like
but
that.
this
Got
time
it?
they gave me a deadline.
Yeah.
Hurry, will you?
Ain't a tough guy in the world that's gonna frisk you there.
So I want to take a look at a couple examples of apologetic arguments, just to show you how filled they are with misdirection. This isn't a debunking video or disproving Christianity video where I go through all the known arguments about Christianity and prove that there's no God. But I think it's important to point out just how much sleight of hand and how much misdirection is in so many popular apologetics arguments.
What are the main things that somebody who's like, I need some reasons,
Why it's like, this is worth basing my life on. What's your starting block? Like,
Well, there's two facts you need to establish to show that Christianity is true. The first is, does God exist? If he does exist, then at least a resurrection is possible and Christianity could be true. The second fact is what you mentioned, that Jesus really rose from the dead. If Jesus really did rise from the dead, if he predicted and accomplished his resurrection from the dead, then Christianity is true.
It could mean that. Could be the devil playing a trick to make you lose focus of who the real God is. I mean, obviously, I don't think that's what happened, but that's another possibility if the resurrection was true. But also, even according to the Bible, Jesus wasn't the only person who was raised from the dead that day. So even if you could prove that he was resurrected, it wouldn't necessarily prove that Jesus was any more special than all the other people who were also raised from the dead. It was also a very common belief at the time that the followers of God would someday be resurrected. So of course he would have said that he was going to be resurrected someday. Now, I'm not saying that Jesus did in fact resurrect from the dead, but his claim is that if he did, it means that Christianity has to be true. But that just isn't the case.
If he didn't, it's false. In other words, it's a religious worldview you can investigate and discover whether or not it took place. It's not just someone's philosophy, right? It's based in historical facts. So the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, we lay all that out.
I'm not going to go through the evidence. You can buy my book for that.
Guys, I'm like really smart now. You don't even know. You could ask me, Kelly, what's the biggest company in the world? And I'd be like, blah, 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 giving you the exact right answer.
But the problem is that it's very flimsy evidence that doesn't hold up under any scrutiny. So it's better to just say there's a lot of evidence than to actually say what the evidence is.
Young lady, that's the most intelligent question I've ever been asked.
Really?
Oh, I could give you an answer, but the only ones who'd understand it would be you and me. And that includes your teacher.
One of the most famous atheist New Testament scholars, Gerd Ludemann, said, it is historically certain that Peter and the other disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ.
Wow.
That's the atheist talking. Well, why is he still an atheist? Because he believes these were visions, these were hallucinations. So I went to an expert on the human mind, and I laid out all the historical data, and I said, now, Dr. Collins, wouldn't you admit to me these disciples didn't encounter the resurrected Jesus, they just had hallucination. And he looked at me and said, that's not possible. I said, well, you seem pretty sure of yourself. He said, I am. And he said, you got to understand something about the nature of hallucinations. Hallucinations are like dreams. They happen in individual minds. They don't spread like the common cold. He looked at me and he said, Lee, the earliest account says that 500 people encountered the resurrected Jesus at one time. He said, Lee, 500 people having the same hallucination at the same time would be a bigger miracle than the resurrection.
When I was a kid, there was an older couple at our church. We used to visit them a lot. They were kind of like our adopted grandparents. After the man died, his wife was very sad. They were married for like 60-something years. They were madly in love. And she believed that he was visiting him every night to say that he missed her and he was waiting for her in heaven. Now, I don't believe that was actually him visiting her, but I do believe that grief is very powerful. Ludemann didn't really posit that everyone had the same vision, but that people were very excited that Peter had the vision and that the story spread from there. Stories spread on their own. People's desire to believe a miracle is a very powerful thing. But he gives credibility to atheists for some reason. So he used Ludemann as a way to say that even atheists believe they saw Jesus, but then misdirects it so that he can straw man the actual argument. Even to the point where he talks about the 500 witnesses, which is my favorite apologetic. We have a story that says 500 people saw it. We don't have 500 accounts of this. That's very different. If I was in court being accused of a crime and I said, no, there were 500 people that saw me somewhere else, that wouldn't work as an alibi on its own. I would have to show them who those 500 people were and have those people talk about their accounts. I can't simply say 500 people saw me somewhere else.
My favorite argument for the existence of God that I find the most compelling is a version of the cosmological argument, which goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Something can't just come into being from nothing. Secondly, the universe began to exist. I think we have both good philosophical arguments and scientific evidence for the finitude of the past, from which it follows, third, therefore the universe has a cause. And when you do a conceptual analysis of what it is to be a cause of the universe, you arrive at a being which is an uncaused, beginningless, timeless, spaceless, enormously powerful, personal creator of the universe. So for me, that is a very convincing argument for God.
Okay, so that was mostly misdirection, so let's break it down.
Whatever begins to exist has a cause.
In this universe, based on our knowledge of how physics work within this universe,
something can't just come into being from nothing.
We actually don't know what could come from nothing because we've never observed nothing. We've never encountered nothing. Everything we have ever encountered is something. So to definitively say that we know what can and can't happen from nothing is making a statement about something that we simply don't have the data to show.
Secondly, the universe began to exist.
I mean, most people would argue that you can't really say that the universe began because that's a statement about time, and time itself started with the Big Bang. But I also recognize that the idea of the universe beginning is a way to say it so that our brains can understand it a bit better. So I'll grant that for the argument.
I think we have both good philosophical arguments and scientific evidence for the finitude of the past, from which it follows, third, therefore the universe has a cause.
We don't necessarily know this. Maybe it does, but we also don't know that the rules within our universe are the same beyond our universe. So saying we know this is not correct. But yeah, maybe it is possible, probably very possible, probably plausible that the universe had a cause.
And when you do a conceptual analysis of what it is to be a cause of the universe, you arrive at a being which is an uncaused, beginningless, timeless, spaceless, enormously powerful.
He doesn't explain why it has to be a being at all here, and what he means by a conceptual analysis. He just yada yada yada's the main part.
We were engaged to be married. We bought the wedding invitations, and yada yada yada. I'm still single.
So what's she doing now?
Yada.
The entire argument hinges on the yada, what leads to that conclusion. But over and over again, he just repeats that if you do the conceptual analysis, you will find this to be true.
And then you do a conceptual analysis of what it is to be a cause of space and time, matter and energy, and I think you're able to show that a beginningless, uncaused, timeless, spaceless, immaterial, enormously powerful personal creator of the universe exists, which is the core concept of God. And therefore there must be a transcendent cause beyond the universe that brought it into being. And an analysis of what attributes this cause must have leads me to think that it is an uncaused, changeless, spaceless, timeless, enormously powerful, personal creator of the universe.
But every once in a while, he tells you what those analyses are.
It must be uncaused because we've seen there cannot be an infinite regress of causes.
We don't know that you can't have infinite regress. That's just an argument that he makes and other people like this make so that they can dismiss it as something that can't be. And so far, we know nothing about that cause. It could be infinite regress. It could be just one step back. And that thing was caused by something we don't understand.
So we must come to an absolutely first, uncaused cause. It must be timeless and therefore changeless, at least without the universe, because it created time. Because it also created space, it must transcend space as well.
We don't know that. Again, these are statements and assumptions based on something we have absolutely no knowledge about, so how can he know all these rules? These are all assumptions spoken as fact and made to sound smart.
And therefore be immaterial, not physical. Moreover, I would argue this cause must also plausibly be personal. For ask yourself, how else could a timeless cause give rise to a temporal effect with a beginning, like the universe?
He says in all the other arguments that it has to be personal, but when he actually says how we got there, he just thinks that that might mean it's personal. All the other times, he says that conceptual analysis says that it has to be these things. But when you look closer, there's a lot of assumptions, and there's a lot of, I think it should be this way. None of this is even close to being established.
Grifting is lying. Okay, so like a string is a sweater, like paint is a Sistine Chapel. Sure, grifting includes lying, but only a liar would call grifting lying.
If atheism is true, we all have brains, but if atheism is true, do we really have minds?
They're the same thing.
We seem to experience minds, but it's a problem for atheism. Here's why. By the way, it's called the problem of mind.
I think someone here has a problem with the mind, am I right? I mean, I do.
And it's called the problem of mind, or it's called sometimes the mind-body problem. And the reason why it's called that is because how do you get a mind if all you have is a material universe? Because the mind is not material.
Yes, it is.
In other words, in a universe that's just made up of space, time, and matter, you can get a brain. That's another material thing in the material universe. But can you get a mind from a material universe? That's the trick. How do you get this? Well, maybe they're the same thing. Maybe brains are just minds. Really? If that's the case, we could solve the problem and stay inside the room.
You solved the mystery.
Yeah. Hey.
What?
What do you say you and I get out of here?
But is that the case? If I'm looking at the killer, this is the guy who I say later on is the killer of his son, Ryan. How do I know that this guy is really the killer? Well, if all the attributes of this guy match all the attributes, if the DNA this guy has matches the DNA at the room, I know I have the same person. Anytime you have two things that have the same attributes, you have an identity relationship. They are the same. Well, could I do that here? Are all the attributes of the brain identical to all the attributes of the mind?
I think so. The mind is your brain. And the only reason we have a different word for it is because we used to not understand that.
If they are, we can get an answer by staying inside the room, because mind is just brain. Well, that's the question. I don't think they're the same at all. There's a difference between brain and mind. Let me show you 5 ways they differ. Number 1, brains are physical, and therefore you can measure them.
The brain is a physical thing with electrical pulses sending signals.
I can take this and I can weigh it. I can measure its depth, its length, its mass. But I can't really do that with the mind.
These are pictures of my brain. And this is when these pictures were taken. I was part of a cognitive study when I was in recovery from alcohol. The first week that I quit drinking, I went in the MRI and I did a bunch of puzzles while they looked at my brain activity. And then after I was sober for 3 months, I went back in the MRI and I did those tests again. It was a really cool experience, and I'm really glad that I could be part of it. They were able to see what parts of my brain were working when I was thinking about things and solving problems. It's physical.
This is a significant difference between brain and mind. Brain is measurable, mind is immeasurable.
To say that the mind is a separate thing from that, and that it's an immeasurable thing, is simply presenting another claim that has no evidence. If we are to believe that the mind is not physical, you don't just assert that, you show that. All he is doing is saying that the evidence for God is this thing that we also don't have evidence for.
I wish that to happen. I kind of think I can wish things into the world now.
It's true. People can do that.
Now, of course, this is one of the weakest arguments I've ever heard for the existence of God, but for some reason, the title of the video, The Strongest Argument for God? Your Mind Itself. And this was posted very recently. But arguments like these, especially arguments like your mind is evidence for God, can seem so out there, so bad, that you wonder who exactly is being convinced by these arguments. And that brings me to the segment I skipped over, the mark.
I know my part, but who's the mark? So who's the mark?
Who's the mark?
We don't care about the mark.
Are atheists the mark? Are they trying to convince us with their arguments?
interesting because a lot of naysayers, a lot of atheists, those who are against, the Bible and creation by, intelligent design, they would say that the Bible is kind of a dumb book, and it's for people who aren't sharp and all this. But here you are, a detective, and the opposite attracted you. It was the intellectualism of Jesus that attracted you.
Oh, classic atheist. It's not that the Bible is full of contradictions and historical inaccuracies. We just think it's kind of dumb. But I mean, these guys used to be atheists, right? And they were convinced. Maybe. People are constantly sending me arguments that they think will convince me. And then I read them, and I notice the flaws immediately, and they never convince me. But I'm not all atheists. Maybe God has just hardened my heart like Pharaoh. Maybe some atheists are convinced by this. I can't find them, but maybe. But this line of work seems to be profitable. Since Frank Turek's Cross-Examined is considered a ministry, it's considered a nonprofit, so we can look up their financials. And it seems to be doing quite well. But unfortunately, they don't have a similar document to show how many atheists they have convinced. But based on the videos I've seen of Turek talking to atheists, it always seems more like he's trying to dunk on them than it is that he's trying to convince them.
They say brain, and he says, yeah, with your brain. What's the history of your brain? How did your brain get here? And they say, oh, my brain is the product of random forces that didn't have its end in mind. And then Lennox says, and you trust it? Oh. Yeah, well, why would you trust such a thing? Why would you trust a computer if such a computer could come into existence out of nothing if it wasn't designed?
That's why science exists, because we can't trust our brain. So we create checks and balances, and we put systems in place so that we can study things without our silly little brains messing it up. Because brains aren't very good at interpreting reality. They're good at survival. But that's not the point of that argument. The point of the argument is to look smart, not to be smart. And that's true with a lot of these guys. It always seems like they're trying to dunk the atheists instead of convincing them of the truth. And with Frank Turek, I think that's why he argues with so many college students. He's putting on a show. He's recording it so that he can upload it to his YouTube channel to look like he owned this ridiculous atheist. He doesn't care about the conversation. He sees these conversations as a wrestling match where there is a victor and a loser. And I just don't think that's how conversations should work. And I also don't think that any of these guys are selling their books to atheists or convincing atheists. I don't think that atheists are the mark at all, because we saw the mark already.
I didn't even know what a logical fallacy was at that point as his youth pastor. And I failed him because I didn't know how to answer questions.
So many people are leaving Christianity. So many of them are young people who have youth pastors and parents who are worried about them, who have church leaders who are worried about all these people that are leaving. And they're desperate. And desperate people are an easy mark.
There's actually a knack to this. If you're trying to fast track into a mark's sympathies, there's nothing quite as effective as having your first conversation be from a hospital bed they put you in.
Last time I went to a church service that wasn't a wedding or a funeral was about 9-10 years ago. It was a Christmas Eve service. I was visiting my family, and we all went to church on Christmas Eve. The church knew that there would be a lot of college students visiting and non-church goers visiting their family and coming out to church for the first time in a long time. So the service was based completely around Lee Strobel's The Case for Christmas, and everyone got to go home with a free copy. Churches and Christian parents are worried. They desperately want their kids to come back to God, to come back to church. So they are sold these books, and they are sold these seminars, and they are sold these classes on how to argue their faith. They watch the YouTube videos that get that ad revenue. They buy hundreds of books to hand out at services. It doesn't matter that these arguments rarely convince anyone, that they don't hold up under any scrutiny. What matters is they sound like they would convince people. Worried churches are the mark. Worried parents are the mark. Worried youth pastors are the mark.
You can't cheat an honest man, right? That's why we never feel sorry for the mark.
And of course, we all know what the payoff is.
I just made the world's easiest $5,000.
Just take it. So you never forget me.
See, an artist takes whatever he wants when somebody's looking right at him.
Book sales, speaking engagements, the ability to register as a nonprofit because you're talking about religion. Lee Strobel's a multimillionaire. Frank Turek and William Lane Craig are making a pretty decent living. Apologetic channels pop up all the time. There's a new grifter every day. And now that I think about it, an atheist YouTuber with over 200,000 subscribers turning back to Jesus and becoming an apologist for the faith, I could make a lot more money than I am now. Everybody, thank you so much for coming watching Just Believe It with Trevor Poelman, the show where we believe it because it's the truth and Jesus is the God of the world. Thank you so much. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching Just Believe It. I hope you all learned a lot today about what it means to believe, what it belief is, and why you just gotta believe. Thanks, everybody. All right. I guess it's still believe it or not. I love you all.
Work, Sky Moon.